Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and welcome back to more changes to the way static variables work in GameMaker. A few weeks ago I talked about some changes that were made to the way static variables work in GameMaker, specifically pertaining to being able to access them outside the function in which they were declared. And at the end of that video I did mention that there were some changes to the way that static constructors work. And today we're going to talk about those. So on the screen in front of you, you see a pretty bog-standard object-oriented programming example. You have an animal superclass with a vocalize method. You have a dog class which derives from animal. You have a dinosaur class which derives from animal. You can do some pretty bog-standard things, such as saying var, what's a good dog name? Sparky is going to be a new dog. We could say var, I need a dinosaur name now. There's a, blast from the past that most of you probably haven't thought about in about 20 years. And we can say things such as sparky.vocalize and littlefoot.vocalize, and this is going to call the method vocalize in each of these the dog and the dinosaur classes. And let me drag this out over here to the side so that we can keep it on the side of the screen while this is running. Why are we running an Opera GX? The beta likes to switch me to Opera GX sometimes. Anyway, we can see Sparky saying bark bark and Littlefoot saying chomp. I'm not sure if that's accurate because Littlefoot was an herbivore, but alright, never mind. Let me close this window down here because I really don't need it and it's just taking up space. So where am I going with this? So GameMaker has had a function instance of since the beginning of the 2.3 days, and this is a function which, let me comment out. Actually, let me just show debug message these, so that we can print them to the console instead of putting them in a message box. We can say show debug message instance of Sparky, and for those of us who came from a Java/C# background, we might have thought that this was going to work in a slightly different way. Actually, I think a lot of programming languages have operators and or functions that are in the vein of instance of, not just Java and C#. But I think a lot of us thought that the instance of function was going to return us a true or false based on whether or not the struct that you pass it is an instance or a descendant of a particular type. And as it turns out, that's not what this function does. This function will simply show you the name of the constructor function that was used to instantiate a struct as a string, and that is occasionally useful. I have, over the years, had one or two uses for that. It's not really something that you should rely on in your code very often.
Hey.
But unfortunately, there wasn't really a good way to do what I just said, and to figure out true or false is the struct in question either a direct instance or a descendant of another struct. Until a few weeks ago, I can't remember if this was introduced in GameMaker 2022.11 or 2023.1, but we now have the is instance of function. And with this, we can say is instance of, we can say, for example, Sparky and dog. This is notably the function name, the constructor name dog without the parentheses. You're going to refer to the, basically the type itself. We could say Sparky is a dinosaur. Like that. We could say Littlefoot is an animal. So we should see here true, false, and true as the results of this, or maybe 1, 0, and 1, because GameMaker, well, it does have a true Boolean type. It will not print them out as true and false. It will only print them out as 1 and 0. Sparky is a dog, true. Sparky is a dinosaur, false. Littlefoot is an animal, true. And that is the is instance of function in a nutshell. It will return true or false if the struct in question is either directly an instance of the type, or whether it descends from the type in the inheritance hierarchy. So next, some relevant changes to the way that statics work in GameMaker and structs. We have two new functions, static get and static set. And these functions are a little bit, in some ways, playing with fire. Static get is a function which will allow you to get essentially all of these static properties of a struct. So if you were to simply say show debug message Sparky and have GameMaker serialize Sparky to a string, you could use JSON encode, or you could not use JSON encode if you want. It will. I don't believe it will show the static. I'll label it to make it easier to read. GameMaker will not by default serialize or save or encode in any way any of the static properties inside a struct. If you had a local property, such as any instance variable, this would be saved. This would be written when you stringify it, when you JSON encode it, as you can see over here. But any static properties, such as variables or methods or anything like that, will not be. However, if you use the static get function on a struct, this will return a struct containing all of the static properties of the constructor. And this will be essentially the same struct for every instance of dog, for every instance of dinosaur. If you were to show debug message this, we would see that we're going to have a little bit of, I believe, built-in GameMaker data as well as the function, a reference to the function. So we have Sparky's static data is going to be an unknown built-in variable, which is some GameMaker thing. And we're going to have the vocalize method, which is a reference to a function. And we're also going to have another built-in thing, which you can actually see is the toString method, which is implicitly called whenever you try to turn a struct into a string. Which you can overwrite if you want. And that can be quite useful sometimes. Let's see. So with this, you can save the static data to a variable just like any other struct, and you can do some things to it. If you wanted to, you could say dog static data dot vocalize is going to be a function, and instead of saying bark bark, you can change that vocalization to something else. You can turn it into something like, I don't know, woof, or a bow wow, or whatever you want to say. I have never in my entire life heard a dog say bow wow, but that's what all the like children's literature from like the 1950s say that dogs say. So, what do I know? Anyway, after this change was made, after you change the vocalize method that it belongs to the static data, you can see that the results of this method call are now woof woof instead of bark bark. If you were to instantiate a new dog, let's say Chase is my new dog. That is like my all-time favorite name for a dog. Don't ask why. The new dog also, when it is asked to vocalize, it will Chase will say woof woof instead of bark bark, as it was initially defined up here, because we have changed the static method, which belongs to all instances of the class over here when we did this. And of course, you can overwrite static methods. You can give instances of structs their own copies of a method. So you could say chase. Oh, come on. Chase.vocalize is going to be a function, and you would have to bind this as a method, I think. But I won't get into that now. What should So if we do this, Chase now has a local copy of the vocalize method, which is separate from the static copy, which belongs to all instances of the struct by default. If I were to run this, our list of printouts in the console is going to start getting a little bit long, but we can see that we have changed Chase's vocalize text to yap yap, and other instances of dogs still have the same text. There was a very yappy dog who lived next to me for a while, but she moved away. So the only dog in my life I've ever met who was really annoying. Anyway, that is some of the shenanigans you can do with static get. You can, for example, overwrite static methods like this. You can access static properties. And lastly, and I'm gonna scroll down a little bit to separate it visually from the rest of the code. There is the static set method. And this is a little bit playing with fire. This static set is actually a little bit reminiscent of the old instance change function, the much reviled by some instance change function that GameMaker includes, which lets you change an object instance from one type of object to another. Static set will more or less allow you to do the same thing for structs. So if I were to say, if I were to go back to the old instance of function show debug message, we can print out Littlefoot's type. I'll just stick a little separator up there, again, to separate it visually. We can print out Littlefoot's type in the console, and that's going to give us dinosaur. That's basically what I did earlier in the video. If I were to static set, the first function argument being Littlefoot, that is the struct that we want to change the type of, and the second function argument being dog static data, that is the struct containing the static data that we want to apply to Littlefoot. If I were to do this, and if I were to print out Littlefoot's type again, we can see that we're going to be being like transmogrified from a dinosaur to a dog, and that is a little bit playing with fire. If you want to just change types like that of an instance at runtime, I am generally not a fan of doing this. We can see that our vocalize method also changes. Our static vocalize method changes to that of the dog. I am generally not a fan of doing this kind of thing, although there is a very good reason for which this function was added, which is that if you have var, I'm going to call it anonymous data because it's going to be a struct which contains, which was not instantiated from a constructor type as we were doing earlier. This is going to be some anonymous data. If I were to, if I were to copy this line and say, oh, come on, what was that? If we were to print out the type of the anonymous data, we're going to get just a string containing undefined. If we were to try to call anonymous data.vocalize, this is obviously going to crash because we do not have a vocalize method that belongs to this anonymous data. I am going to run this. It is going to crash for exactly the reason that I just said. If we were to look up in the console, we can see the anonymous data's type is it's just a struct, it's not undefined. I think undefined is what you would get if you were to try to instance of like a number or a string or something that isn't a struct. Anyway, if you were to static set anonymous data to the, for example, let's go with dog static data again. We could print out your type again, and we will see that your type has now been updated to that of the dog. After we do this, and we will see that we will indeed be able to call the vocalize method on it. And this is going to be somewhere in this list of printouts down here. We can see that our type has changed from struct to dog, and now we can say woof woof when we vocalize without crashing the game. And I said that there was a good reason to do this, and I'm not sure if I really sold it here. So I've shown what you can do with the static set function, but that may not be the best maybe visual example to help you really get a feeling for why this sort of thing might be useful. So I've gone ahead and written out a player struct, and that's a player constructor function. And we've got some properties, a level, some health. We've got a level up method, which will just increase my level. Pretty basic stuff, right? I can save our, let's say me is going to be new player. We could show debug message that instance. We could me.level up. That needs to be capitalized. We could show debug message that value again. Why is Feather complaining about this? Really? I thought I'd turn that naming rule off. Anyway, this will, if we run this, we'll be able to see that we've got ourselves a player with some health and some levels and all that. Right, health is 10, level is 2. If you were to save this to a file or something, because saving player data to a file is something that you often want to do in games, I'm not actually going to save it to a file. I'm just going to encode it as JSON and store it as a string. Of our saved data can be JSON stringify, and we can show debug message the saved data, and that's going to look a lot like what you got when you just stringify the struct itself, but it's going to be in JSON format, so we're going to have the quotation marks, and also it serialized one of the unknown built-in variables, which I'm pretty sure is not supposed to happen. I should probably report that to GameMaker as a bug. So this bit over here, just ignore that, because I'm pretty sure that's a bug. That wasn't there when I was testing this earlier. Anyway, we can pretend that this saved data is going to be saved to a file or something like that, and we can pretend that it's going to be loaded in as a file later. And we can save our struct loaded from a file or something is going to be JSON parse, and that's going to deserialize the saved data, and we can of course we can always print that out to the screen, and we can try to call the level up method on that, and that is not going to work because when you deserialize a struct from JSON, its methods are not preserved. As you saw in this JSON string that it spat out, it does not contain a level up anything. Functions can't be saved regardless in GameMaker, the way that they can in some languages such as JavaScript. But that function is gone, and it will not come back when we JSON parse this. If I were to run this, it would of course crash, for similar reasons to why the game crashed earlier. So we've got ourselves our unknown built-in variable, which I'm not a fan of being there, because that is, again, some kind of bug. But we've got our health is 10, our level is 2, and we crash when we try to call level up on it. But if you want to get that static method back, we can say static set GameMaker. We can say static set struct loaded from a file or something, and the player constructor. And unfortunately, it will not let me do this. I kind of wish that it would, because when you say static set and when you just pass it a constructor function itself, it'll say incorrect type needs to be a struct. I may also bother Yo-Yo Games about that to see if that's by design or if I can make a case for using static set with a just a constructor function like that. However, you can save our static player data is going to be something like static get either an existing instance of a player struct, or you can simply create a new player that's just not used for anything. You can simply instantiate an instance of that struct that's not used for anything, and you can just grab the static data from that and use that instead. And this will allow you to reassign the static... You know, I'm going to turn feather off because all these squigglies are getting on my nerves. You can go away for now. Alright, no more squigglies. We can assign the static player data to the struct that we loaded from a file, so this is now a type of player, as if you had loaded it, as if you had instantiated it directly. we can now call the level up method on it. We could, if you wanted to, we can now use the instance of. That is a really long variable name. I probably should not have gone with that. And we can see that, for all intents and purposes, as far as GameMaker is concerned, we are now able to call the level up method on that struct, on that data. Our level does go up. When we use type of, or when we use instance of, rather, we get player. I was bashing on the instance of function earlier, but it's actually turned out to be pretty useful in this video for these demonstration purposes. Still not a function that you want to use every day in like regular GameMaker use though. And we can change the type of the struct from just an anonymous struct that doesn't have a type to an instance of player. And that is really why the static get and static set functions were added. I know that people are going to use static get and static set to just change types of instances, like I was doing up here, and that's really not something that you want to be doing if you want your code to not be completely spaghetti. But for the intended use, I think this is a pretty good addition to GameMaker. I don't know if I would go back and refactor all of the code that I've written for like saving and loading player data in the past to use this new functionality. I'm not sure if I would like spend the time changing something that already works, but definitely going forward, for future projects, for example, my Wizard game project, I will most likely be making use of this in some capacity for saving and loading stuff. Anyway, I don't think I have this project on source control, but I guess I will because there's kind of a lot of it. If you want the code for this, look for the GitHub repository down in the video description. If you want to take this example, if you want to play around with it yourself, if you want to see what the rules are for the new statics in GameMaker, you feel free to mess around. See if you can do anything useful. Otherwise, I'm going to end this off here. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. If you want to contribute to the channel, I have a Patreon, which will be linked in all the usual places. Otherwise, I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, one tutorial like this, and one Let's Make a Game, the aforementioned 3D wizard game. So I hope you all found that useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Army Armbuster, DJ Gibbles, Edward Holt, GameMaker, Gamer Player, Harold Guidry, Manta Ray, Sindra Larson, Squarecrow, Vitro V, and Zengiment for supporting these videos. If you want to contribute to the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.